Hi, and welcome to ChurchTherapy.com's pastor training videos. Today we're going to be talking about discipleship for the person who is struggling with depression. This can be a real challenge because obviously when someone is feeling depressed, their motivation is low, they might tend to be a little bit more withdrawn, may not be consistent in coming to church or to appointments, and so you may kind of struggle with how to go about helping them move forward spiritually. So the question I want us to be asking ourselves is, what does it mean for someone who's struggling with depression to focus on spiritual growth? What is their next step? What does moving forward look like for them? So sometimes when we're working with people with depression, we make the mistake of trying to fix it. Maybe we quote some Bible verses or encourage them to, cast their cares on God, or things like that really end up kind of backfiring because it makes the person feel like the depression is their fault. And certainly there are some cases in which someone is going through a hard time because of the consequences of their own sin or something like that. They got into a whole bunch of debt and now they're facing the consequences of that, and that is upsetting to them. That's different than what I'm talking about today, which is really a clinical depression that is a biological illness, and it can be treated both with medication and counseling, as well as just a really great support system, and that's where pastors in the church can really be of help. Now, we don't want to just leave someone who's struggling with depression, to themselves. They need extra support during that time. So in addition to just being a community and loving them, giving them meals, helping them maybe clean their house or practical things like that, we can also encourage them to continue to persevere in their faith when it's very difficult. Often people who are struggling with depression feel like God is far away, and they don't feel Him. They pray and it seems like nothing happens, and so it's very discouraging and sometimes makes them question whether or not they're really even a Christian. I've certainly worked with people who have experienced that and have been asking that question: what does it mean for me to be a Christian, especially if they're struggling with things like suicidal thoughts? How can you be a Christian and want to die? So those are real questions and real things that they're facing because their brains are being impacted, obviously, by what's going on for them physically. So just some tips here. I think one thing that's really important to do is to go at their speed. Sometimes we try to really charge ahead and give them lots of thoughts, or try to really encourage them, but really meeting them where they're at is more important. Obviously this involves a lot more listening than it does talking. Just sitting side by side with them and walking through kind of a sense of perseverance together is really important. It makes them not feel alone, and really helps build up the fact that they are still walking with Jesus even in the midst of struggle. They might be interested to know that there are many famous people, including Mother Teresa. If you read her letters that were published after her death, she actually struggled significantly with depression at times, even in the midst of carrying out her life's mission, and certainly that was an extraordinary work that she did. But she had, these dark times, and many of the what we call desert fathers, early monks, basically experienced this dark night of the soul. And so there's a real connection there in terms of helping people realize that depression and Christianity are not kind of mutually exclusive, that you can really wrestle with questions of faith and struggle with emotional difficulties and still find connection with Christ in that. So that's another piece to this, is really emphasizing connection with Christ in the midst of suffering. Someone who is struggling with depression is clearly suffering. If they could make it go away by praying the right prayer, they certainly would do that, but that's just unfortunately not usually how it works. And so we need people to come alongside us and walk with us. And Christ voluntarily chose a life of suffering. And so He certainly understands when people are suffering. He has great compassion on those who are struggling and suffering. And so we can be like Christ in really walking alongside those who are struggling, but also helping them to see that, Jesus is walking alongside them, even if they do not see or feel Him, even if they feel like their prayers are wasted. That's not the case. But again, you want to watch out for trying to convince them to feel something different or believe something different. Gentle reminders of encouragement about what's true without it feeling like you need to kind of debate them or feel like their feelings are wrong right now. That's a tricky balance, but is certainly a helpful one to really have an encouraging tone, and to again listen more than you're talking. So you're really coming alongside and you're just walking alongside. Now, one of the really big challenges with discipleship with someone who's struggling with depression, especially if it's recurrent and chronic, is that it's not something that just clears up and goes away and then you don't have to face it anymore. For someone who experiences recurrent depressive episodes, you might feel like, oh, haven't we already been through this, and can't we just kind of move on? What is wrong with them? Why don't they get it? Why aren't they trusting God enough? We kind of fall into these traps, when really it's just a total misunderstanding of the way depression works in our bodies. So certainly you want to encourage treatment, of course, medication if that's something that their doctor would recommend, counseling can help, but just really the sense of long suffering alongside a person that, Jesus was willing to kind of lay down his life for us. And what does it mean for us to lay down our lives, lay down our preferences, sit with someone who is feeling sad without trying to talk them out of it, for maybe a long amount of time and maybe even their whole lives. What does that look like to have that kind of love for someone? So I think that's a really big and important challenge for us as we think about what does it mean to love people. And I'm talking about depression, but really anxiety or other forms of chronic mental illness can also be a really big challenge for the church, because we're okay sometimes when we're facing small problems, but when it kind of drags on over years and years and it's a chronic issue, then it can be a lot harder for us to have patience with that. But it's so important, because obviously patience is the most needed in these kinds of situations to really, extend Christ's love to the brokenhearted. So that's important to remember. Also focus on what they can do. Sometimes when someone is depressed, they have a lot of thoughts about what they can't do. But really, maybe there's a ministry that doesn't require a specific commitment, and then when they feel like showing up and being able to participate, then maybe they can. Maybe it's some office work, or volunteer work, or a way to maybe greet people on a Sunday when they're feeling up to it, but not be on a schedule, that kind of thing. So if there's ways to kind of adapt and accommodate for that, that's helpful. Finding ways for them to plug into community where they can be taken care of, but also where they can give when they have the energy to, without a lot of pressure or expectation or demands. So I think there's a balance there. But really, you're seeing the best in them instead of kind of seeing the problem. Even calling someone a person who's struggling with depression as opposed to a depressed person. That makes a big difference just in our language there, how much we're labeling them as depressed and how much we're labeling them as a child of God who is suffering and struggling, but has a lot to give as well. We know that they have the Holy Spirit as a deposit inside of them, and He is working in their lives. And so even in the midst of pain and struggle, we can still be used by God. So really, again, walking alongside them, not pressuring them, but giving them opportunities to be a part of the body instead of feeling like they have to kind of stay on the fringes or be marginalized. That's really important. And it's really what Jesus did. He really put right at the front and center the people who, were struggling the most. And of course, healing is an important aspect of this. Not only praying for miraculous healing, of course, but really avoiding kind of putting a lot of pressure on that. There's sometimes inner healing things we try to do that actually really make the problem worse, and so we don't want to kind of put pressure on the situation or have some kind of highly emotional experience for them. But really just having faith to pray for them gently and calmly, and also, again, encouraging treatment, because anything that we do that is a step towards healing, in my opinion, is something that is a spiritual act of faith. So taking medication is just as much trusting God as praying for miraculous healing. And so those are some thoughts. I hope that you can apply those in your context, and feel free to leave a comment. I would love to hear your thoughts. Take care.